Hey, Hammy here. Here with section 2.3 video from chapter 2, on which we're going to look at properties of water and why water is important for life and how those properties make life possible here on Earth. If you remember about our discussion at the end of the last video, we were talking about covalent bonds. Remember, covalent bonds are when bonds are sharing electrons. Most of the times, or sometimes nonpolar, they share those electrons equally. And when we draw a line between, for example, I used the example of methane, which is carbon, hydrogen, 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 okay, CH4, which is methane. We talk about their electronegativities. They are all sharing that pair of shared electrons. They spend equal amounts of time around the carbon and the hydrogen. With water, however, you have your oxygen here and your hydrogens kind of here at, it's like 100-something point degree angle between here and here. The oxygen atom is more electronegative. So the oxygen, you see the red arrows here, the oxygen atoms or the electrons are going to spend more time around here, around the oxygen side, okay? That makes this side slightly negative, and it makes the hydrogen sides slightly positive because that electron has a negative charge. Okay, so we say there's a polar covalent bond, or makes the molecule polar with a slightly negative side up here and slightly positive side on this end. Okay, and what this does is sets up weak attractions between molecules. This can be between the same molecules, like in water, or different molecules, like over here in DNA. If you remember back to Bio 1, there are hydrogen bonds between the nitrogenous bases between the two outside strands. So between adenine and thymine, you've got two hydrogen bonds, usually represented with dotted lines. And between C and G, you've got 3 hydrogen bonds. Okay, and the single hydrogen bond can be easily broken. When you've got multiple hydrogen bonds, that helps keep the DNA molecule fairly stable, twisted into a double helix, and the 2 strands held together. Now remember, when you want to replicate that DNA, remember DNA helicase comes and it unzips it, and then we use the old. So the hydrogen bonds can be broken, but it is a good mechanism. Works very well in living systems to hold certain shapes. Some proteins between the amino acids that make up the proteins have hydrogen bonding that occurs when it goes into that tertiary shape, and it helps it clump up and maintain that shape. And we'll learn how protein shape is very important with its function. Okay, water's polarity plays an important part too in different properties that it gives it. Okay, so a little review here. Here's the electron model. We have oxygen, 2 in the first level, 6 in the next level, and then you're sharing here and you're sharing here. So it's oxygen. If you draw the structural formula, oxygen bonded to hydrogen, here it is, about 100. I mentioned that in the last slide. About 104.5 degree angle. Most of the electrons are going to be spending their time around the electron a little bit more than with the hydrogens, and this makes it partially negative and this side partially positive. And when you mix all these water molecules together, and this illustration can show it better than I can draw it, is that the oxygen sides will be attracted to other hydrogens, and the hydrogens are attracted to other oxygens. And so the molecules all sort of stick together or form hydrogen bonds with each other. Okay, these water molecules clinging together because of hydrogen bonding give it 5 properties that we want to look at that make life here on Earth possible. First, it has a high heat capacity. Okay, these hydrogen bonds allow water to absorb a lot of energy, okay, without a lot of great change in temperature. Remember, temperature is the average kinetic energy of the molecules. Okay, if those hydrogen bonds are kind of holding them together, okay, those vibrational forces of the atoms and of the water molecules, it takes more energy in order to heat them up. Okay, this is used by a lot of ecosystems and organisms within their body to not be jumping up and down, up and down, up and down in temperature all the time. Okay, it helps with homeostasis when it comes to body temperature. Ecosystems can do that because if you're by the coast where there's water, the water doesn't change temperatures as drastically in the seasons, and the air coming off the water helps warm the land when it's cold, and it helps cool the land when it's really hot. If you've been at the beach, you notice this during the day when it's hot, the sand is really hot as you tiptoe down, try not to burn your feet, and you go in the water. The water is cool. But then you go out with a stroll with your honey in the evening, and the sand is like, ooh, the sand is cold, 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 cold. And you go down to the water, feels warm. And actually, the water hasn't changed temperature very much. What happens is the sand heats up really hot in the day and then gets really cool at night. But that water kind of maintains that sort of more of a balance of temperature, doesn't change as much. And that's important in human systems because we're mostly water, right? 75% water, and also with ecosystems. Okay, this is just a chart showing this change in state, and this is in your textbook as well, that, as water, so here's solid water, this would be ice down here. So as you are adding, as it increases in temperature, as you add energy, so ice below 0 degrees Celsius, it's going to be ice, 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 ice. Notice once it gets to 0 degrees, it will start to melt. It'll take 80 calories to melt 1 gram of water or 1 gram of ice into 1 gram of water. Once it gets to the liquid state, now the liquid water starts picking up that energy and changing temperature, okay, until you get to 100 degrees or boiling point. Notice to go from liquid water to gaseous water to water vapor, it takes 540 calories to change the state. So you have this big, long, straight line here where it's changing state. It's staying 100 degrees, but you're pulling those. Remember, you go from the liquid state where the molecules are rolling around each other till they're flying in the vapor state, okay, in the state of the gas. Okay, and that takes a lot of energy for water because those hydrogen bonds are holding those water molecules together. Okay, so right along those lines of being able to absorb a lot of energy to change state from liquid to gas, okay, that we call that a high heat of evaporation. It takes a lot of energy to break those hydrogen bonds between the water molecules. Okay, so organisms will often use this as a cooling mechanism, okay, where they will sweat. Or in the previous slide, you see some animals that can't sweat, they'll roll in the mud or the water, or they'll spray water on themselves, or a dog will pant. Okay, it's the moisture in their lungs and in their tongue. As that water changes states from liquid to gas, it's going to take a lot of heat to do that. So we're taking the heat from our body into the air to change states of water. And so that helps bring our main body temperature down. Because water is polar, it's a good solvent. Okay, solvent. Remember, solvent goes back to this whole idea of a solution where you have a solvent and a solute. Okay, so a solution, especially if you've got hydrophilic, which means water-loving. Water-loving polar substances tend to be hydrophilic. Polar likes polar. So things like salts. We talk about the lipid bilayer of the membrane, or the lipid bilayer of the cell membrane, how it has polar and non-polar. Okay, the polar, because water is polar, those plus and minus charges will help kind of break that substance apart. Whereas something is hydrophobic and non-polar, does not dissolve in water. So things like oil, grease, and things like that will not get dissolved by water. But this is good because a lot of metabolic chemical reactions happen in our water, in our bodies, in our cells, which is mostly water. So it helps dissolve those things and carry them through the body or provide a place for those reactions to occur. This slide is just showing the example of that. So you start with sodium chloride, okay, which is a salt, okay, an ionic compound. And when you put salt into water, okay, the slightly hydrophobic or polar ends, okay, hydrophilic or polar ends of the water molecule, notice the oxygen, which is slightly negative, will be attracted to the sodium, positive sodium ions, and the positive hydrogen side will be attracted to the negative chloride ions. And so you'll actually take the salt and you'll break them into ions when you dissolve it in water. Number 4, the fourth property of water that is important for life because of this polarity is water sticking to itself, cohesion, and water sticking to other things, adhesion. Okay, cohesion is the ability of water to cling to other things. Water will flow. Okay, so when you have through a plant or you turn on a faucet, the blood vessels, okay, the blood in our vessels, which is mostly water, the plasma portion, it stays together in a long tube of water, okay, because the water sticks to itself. There's surface tension. You think of a water strider that's kind of going across the top of the water. It can do that because it has little hairs on its legs that give it more surface area so it doesn't break that surface tension. Adhesion, when it sticks to other things, due to the water's polarity, it can stick to other substances. This gives us capillary action. This helps draw water into roots and up through the plant. And so we use this a lot. You'll see transport, where things, because water sticks to itself and other things, plants, animals are able to move substances through this idea of veins, xylem and phloem, or veins and arteries and capillaries in animal bodies. This slide is just showing an example of that. So water enters the plant at the roots. So you have water coming in through the root hairs right here into here. And as the water moves up through the plant, okay, it will stick to the sides of the vessels called xylem. Okay, so it sticks to the wood, to the cells. They're kind of like hollow tubes, and it sticks to the side, and also water sticks to itself. Okay, so, and we call this the transpiration pull model, because as water evaporates up here in the leaf out the stomata, as that water's leaving, okay, the water is kind of, because of its cohesion, it's attached to itself back through the tube. That sort of helps pull the water up through the xylem from the root. So as a plant loses water out at the leaves, the adhesion, cohesion helps pull that water up through the plant to replace the water that's lost. And finally, the last property is frozen water or ice. Solid water is less dense than liquid water. In the solid state, ice is less dense. That's unique. A lot of substances, a lot of liquids, if you freeze them into a solid, okay, they will sink. If you put a block of lead into molten lead, it will sink to the bottom. Okay, water is actually most dense at positive 4 degrees Celsius. And then as it cools down towards freezing point, 0 degrees, the hydrogen bonds between the water molecules become more rigid, but that angle, it also opens up. Okay, so more density, remember, is how much stuff per volume, how many mass per volume. If they're kind of opening up or expanding, it's going to be less dense. This makes ice float. So that's why when you go to the restaurant, okay, and they give you your glass of Coke or Pepsi or Mountain Dew, okay, and they put ice in, so it's nice and icy and cold, they give you a straw. Because it's really annoying when you try to drink it, the ice cubes are on top and it hits you in the nose. So they give you a straw so you can suck the liquidy part off the bottom. But you have to use metal straws and clean them to save the turtles, right? Okay, this is important in nature too, because without this, if we take a look at a pond or a body of water, for example, like this, where a pond is freezing and it starts to snow. And so the air temperature up here is 0 degrees Celsius, cold, cold, cold. And it begins to snow, 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 and there's really cold air up here. So the water gets to be about 0 degrees Celsius up here. Okay. Down here, it's a little bit warmer. And as the cold temperatures go on, it will turn into solid water or ice. Okay, it'll turn into ice, but it's less dense, so it will actually float on the liquid water. Okay, so you end up kind of with this layer where down here at the bottom, most dense is about 4 degrees Celsius. Okay, your ice would be 0 degrees Celsius. Okay, and it might be, a little range of temperatures here. But if ice were more dense, as it began to freeze, the ice would fall to the bottom and your pond would start to freeze from, or lake from the bottom up. And if it's cold enough, could turn into a chunk of ice. Okay, fish and plants and stuff can't survive being frozen solid, okay, in a chunk of ice. Whereas if you get ice on top and then you add a layer of snow, it's actually a pretty good insulator. Okay, and it stays about 4 degrees down here at the bottom. And so your fish, they're a little bit slower. If any of you go ice fishing, it's a little harder to catch things when it's really cold and it's, in the ice, you drill your hole in the ice, but you can, but they're moving around down here, but they're a little bit slower because it's very cold, but they can survive that versus being, frozen solid in a chunk of ice.